You're listening to the Radius Church podcast, recorded live each Sunday in North Hollywood, California.
Our goal in this series is to help you avoid as many regrets this year as possible. That's it. It's pretty practical. And truth is that there are some people who, if nothing changes, you are destined for a year of some things that you're going to be proud of. And in whatever category of life is important to you, you get to decide that. But you might be standing 12 months from now looking back on this year thinking, I'm really excited that I made these choices, or I drew these boundaries, or I started these habits because of where I now am. But also, just as truthfully, there are some people, and I assume some people in this room, that if nothing changes, 12 months from now, you're going to be looking back at another stack of disappointments. And maybe you're the kind of person who doesn't think about your life that way, and that's okay. Where you may not be taking inventory at the end of a year, you just would rather not think about it and just kind of continue to take life as it comes and just do the best that you can. And I'm sure everybody here is doing the best that they can. But as far as our part is concerned, we want to give you the tools necessary, if you want to try and avoid some of those regrets and make the strides in your life that you want to make. And what we introduced last week is that really what separates a life that has some level of success, if you want to call it that, and a life that has just disappointment, regret, is that a life that achieves some progress or makes some strides in aspects of their lives are lives that are willing to say, I don't just want to move forward, I don't just want to get healthy this year, I will do something to make that happen. I can't control all my circumstances and the situations around me and other people's choices for certain, but I will do something to give myself a better chance of seeing something that I want this year. A few Russians came up with an app this last year that let me know what I'm going to look like in 12 months. And I don't know if this will be 12 months. We'll see how the year goes. Whether this is 12 months or 12 years from now or several years from now, this picture actually serves as a perfect illustration of how I want to approach this season of my life. I want to look that guy in the face, Joseph, several years from now or even 12 months from now, and say, hey, listen, I don't want to just let another year roll past just wishing that my life was stronger or better or healthier. I don't just want those things in my life. I will make some things happen. I want to make a promise to you, looking Joseph in 12 months in the eye. Joseph, I promise to you, and maybe you want to make this promise to yourself in 12 months, I don't want to just let another year blow past me. I will do something to make this happen. And over the next few weeks, we're going to cover some big categories of life, and I hope they're helpful for you. We want to talk about how to make some financial progress this year. That's actually a spiritual thing to talk about. We want to talk about maybe how you can grow in your relational life, in your social life, how you can make great strides in your sense of purpose. So no matter what happens in your career this year, you still have a solid sense of why you're on the planet. We want to help you with that if we can. But today I want to start with what I think is the most valuable investment you can make in your life. Underneath all of that, I want to talk about how you get stronger spiritually. And I know I'm in good company because many of you tell me that you're very spiritual people, and I believe that you are. But have you ever noticed that when you talk to people about being spiritual, that if you ask a few more questions, you find that two people who both say that they're spiritual are actually talking about two different things? And so I want to tell you some of the things that I often hear. And maybe you would identify with some of these and maybe you wouldn't when you say you are spiritual. Maybe what you mean is what some people mean when they talk to me. Maybe what you mean is that you are more concerned with thoughts and intuition than you are with just keeping traditions. Maybe that's something you mean when you say that you're spiritual. You're more concerned with thoughts and intuition than you are with trying to maintain some tradition coldly. Maybe when you say that you're spiritual, or certain people I talk to, maybe what you mean is that you're leveraging some practice in your life that helps you through hard emotions. So maybe you're someone who has a meditative practice or a mantra, maybe just showing up to church. It's just a way that you kind of mitigate how icky life feels sometimes. And that's what you mean when you say spiritual? Maybe when you say that you're spiritual, what you mean is that you are open and curious about philosophical or out of the ordinary or extraordinary concepts, that you don't just assume that life is just what we can calculate and just what we figured out so far, that there might be more. There might be more going on and you're open to that. So maybe that's what you mean by spiritual. Or, and I hear this a lot, what you mean when you say spiritual is that you have a reliance on this assumption that your life is going to end up okay no matter what. If you just invest more good in the world than you take or destroy, then the universe or God or some sense of karma is actually going to pay off for you in the end, that it's all going to end up okay because you are a spiritual person. I have found it to be helpful to revisit what Jesus said about the spiritual life because he said something very different. And what he said about the spiritual life is, if you are human, You are spiritual. Like, by virtue of the fact that you are human, that means that from Jesus' perspective, there is some eternal quality about you already. You can call it a soul, you can call it a spirit, but if you are a human, you are spiritual. But then Jesus would take it another step, and he would say that you have an opportunity to nurture the spiritual part of who you are. You have an opportunity to cultivate that. And it's not just by wishing or feeling or hoping or just intuiting those things, not that those are bad, but what Jesus encouraged us to adopt was a lifestyle, a routine, a habit of investing, deepening, strengthening our spiritual lives by something he called faith. And what we talked about last week, and if you weren't here with us, you could go back and listen to that on the podcast. When we think of faith, often what we think is some sort of a belief, that you just have this belief about the way the world works or God or yourself. But when Jesus talked about faith, it was beyond belief. Jesus actually talked about faith as choices that you make. So while at times your belief might suffer from some doubts, faith is acting as if those beliefs are still true, as if you can still depend on the fact that these things are true. You may at times wonder if God exists, but today I will choose to act as though he does. You might struggle sometimes to believe that God loves you, but faith is saying, I will choose to act as if. That's living by faith. And if we want to follow Jesus' example and his vision for life, it promises to pay off some huge dividends. If we are willing to live by faith, there's some pretty amazing things that he says are going to happen for us. Like, for one, he says that you get an all-access pass to God forever. That's a big deal. He says that if you're choosing to live by faith, you actually have a shot at having uninterrupted hope even when life feels difficult. Uninterrupted resolve, even when life feels confusing. Jesus said that if you would choose to live by faith, you actually have prayers that work. That would be crazy. And much, much more. I sound like I'm doing an infomercial for Jesus. I'm not trying to. But it was Jesus that said this, and one of his closest friends quoted him, Matthew 17, "Truly I tell you, if you have faith," again, you're choosing things, not just believing things, you're choosing things as small as a mustard seed, small choices in life. You could say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it'll move. Nothing will be impossible for you. And early on in my own faith journey, this is exactly what I thought faith was going to give me. Magic. Like I could make a mountain levitate across the horizon. That's what I thought faith was going to get me. I want to be honest with you, after several years of imperfectly trying to live out this faith, I've never seen dirt move magically. I've just never seen it, let alone a mountain. But to encourage us, it doesn't mean I haven't seen miracles. I've actually seen them in places that are a little more helpful than just seeing dirt move magically or mountains levitate across the horizon. I've seen as people walk with faith, God has literally changed their lives at the deepest core of who they are. I've seen him save marriages that otherwise would have been impossible to salvage. I have seen the steps of faith change the hands of government. I've seen it kill diseases. I've seen it bring down villains and break addictions. In other words, I have seen miracles because of faith. So, what I want to discuss today, and maybe this is helpful for you, is how do you actually deepen your spiritual life enough to witness your own miracles this year? Because for my part, I think that's what God has coming for you. I think he wants you to experience miracles in a way this year. So how do you deepen your spiritual life so that you are set, you're positioned, you're ready to experience those miracles? And I just want to say at the outset, although it's possible for you, getting there may be different than some of us are used to. It may be a different approach than you're usually willing to participate in. Or maybe I could say it another way. What some of us have been told, or maybe we've picked up on over time, is that growing spiritually is something that you sort of feel your way into or feel your way towards. What Jesus is going to show us is that growing spiritually, becoming stronger or deeper spiritually is something you choose your way into. And I want to give you a chance to do that today. It's going to boil down to the choices that you will make with your life. Are you going to be somebody who chooses that you will grow spiritually this year and moves beyond just simply wishing or wanting it to be true? Now, when I talk about the Spirit of God and the spiritual life, I know that for some of us that might seem like a fairy tale, and that's okay. You might not know what you believe about God's Spirit moving in your life or God moving in your life spiritually, but here's what I think you'll agree with by the end of our time today, is even if you struggle to believe that this is something that actually happens in people's lives, you will absolutely want what people claim to have who have experienced this. I think this is really helpful where Jesus clarifies for us what the power of the Spirit is and how to get it in the way that he closes up the most famous speech ever given. We call it the Sermon on the Mount because it was a sermon that he delivered on a mount. Really creative. I say that joke every time I introduce the Sermon on the Mount, and some of you still laugh, so I'm still going to tell the joke until you stop laughing. But that was the end of the most famous speech ever given. The reason it's so famous is because Jesus introduced such a provocative, different way of living that's inspired people who didn't even follow Jesus to choose a different kind of lifestyle because of the vision that he cast for life. And then after all this incredible vision that he cast for a completely different way of living, this is how he closes the message. This is the end of his sermon. The band comes out and the keyboard player's playing and it's getting really emo here at the end. And then Jesus closes it with this in Matthew chapter 7. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine, kind of like we are today, and puts them into practice is like a wise man or certainly a wise woman who built his house on the rock. It's like a wise person who doesn't just hear something that might be productive and might be helpful and nods their head and like, I really want that to be true. I really wish that was true. It's somebody who takes those things and does the best they can to do something with what they've just heard. Using house here is a really perfect metaphor for life. You can build your life in such a way, you can build your life with such strength that in the next sentence, the rain came down and the streams rose and the winds blew and beat against that house, and yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. Now, that's not inevitable. So in contrast to that, he said, here's a different approach to life in verse 26. But everyone who hears these words of mine and doesn't put them into practice is like a foolish man or a foolish woman who built his or her house on sand. And you're thinking, that's so silly. What moron would build a house, any structure, on sand? But where Jesus was teaching, what they were used to is something called alluvial sand. That was the sand that was on the beaches by the Sea of Galilee and other bodies of water in the region where Jesus was teaching. And what you need to know about alluvial sand is that in the summertime, when there's no precipitation and the sun is out and it's hot and it's bright, alluvial sand is as hard as granite. So when Jesus used that metaphor, they knew exactly what he was talking about, because if someone was to move to that region from out of town, they would move in there and be like, look at all this wide open beachfront property these morons haven't built anything on. I'm going to build my house right here. And all the locals are like, idiot. Because then inevitably, right, the rain's going to set in, the seasons are going to change, and then that stuff just starts to sift out from under you. That's the nature of that sand that he was talking about. And that's where he goes on to say, a life built this way. It says the rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew, and they could have finished the sentence for him. Beat against that house. And here it is, and this is the last thing he says in the most famous speech ever given, and that life, fell with a great crash. He ends the whole thing on this really haunting note, that if you hear what I'm telling you, and you think there's something to it, but you don't do anything with it, it's just like a foolish person who built their life on something that seemed really strong when the conditions were perfect. But when things changed and the inevitable storms of life hit, they realized that they hadn't built on anything strong to begin with in the first place, and their life comes crashing down. This is like so many of us in so many seasons of life. It's like me. It's like people that you know who present strong, might even think that they're strong because they're loud, think that they're strong because they're opinionated, think that they're strong because they got a degree, think that they're strong, and then life presents them, like it will for you, some sort of a storm, financial storm, a career storm, a health storm, something, and then crash. And we see this way too often. Marriage, over. Job, over. Faith, whatever that meant to them, done. Confidence, absolutely in rubble. Happiness, emotional health, shattered. You've lived enough life to know the storm's inevitable. You cannot control those. Crashing, however, nobody plans on that. Nobody plans on their life falling apart when the circumstances change. Nobody at this point in their year sets a New Year's resolution like, you know what, I would love for my life to just fall totally apart somewhere around July. That would be great. Nobody is planning to crash. But the question is a powerful question I want to arm you with, and you have a choice to ask it of your own life. Are you planning not to crash? Nobody's planning to fall apart, but are you planning not to fall apart when the inevitable storms of life hit? Steve Jobs said, ideas without actions aren't ideas, they're regrets. So you might think these are good, productive, helpful ideas, but if you don't take action based on what you're hearing, it might be a recipe for regret. Storms, guaranteed. Crashing, falling apart, devastation, it doesn't have to be that way. I want to go back to the first vision of life that Jesus gives us in verse 25. He says, the rain came down on this one kind of life. The streams rose on this one kind of life. The winds blew and beat against that life, and yet it did not fall. I want you to hear me, my friends, that the difference between a life that is still standing in the storm and a life that falls completely apart in the storm is not because one life felt more spiritual than the other one. It's not because God likes this person a little bit more than this one. It's not because the storm was a little bit lighter, took it easier on this person than on that one. That's not true. The difference between a life still standing in a storm and a life that completely falls apart in a storm is that one life made choices based on faith that generated power long before they needed it. That's the opportunity that you have standing in front of you today. When we talk about the power of God's Spirit, I know that's a mysterious concept. It's easy for us to think about magical things. Like if the power of God's Spirit is at work in my life, then I'm going to have like unicorn blood and all sorts of crazy stuff. What I want to bring as much clarity as I can to this. There's plenty of things that are mysterious about faith and mysterious about the spiritual life, but Jesus wants us to be clear on a couple of things because it's helpful for us. We can do something with this. It is miraculous. It absolutely is miraculous, but maybe not in the ways that we always think, but always in the ways that we most desperately need. See, the real miracle of the power of the Spirit of God in your life is a life still standing in the toughest storms of life. That's a miracle that I need. Jesus describes the power of the Spirit of God deepening, deepening, deepening in your life. You want to know some of the symptoms of that? It's a life that perseveres when everybody else would give up. Symptoms of the power of the Spirit of God in you as it deepens in your life is a life that has joy when everybody else would be devastated. It's a life that chooses to love sacrificially when everybody else can despise and criticize and tear down. Here's one that's been so helpful for me. The power of the Spirit of God in my life has given me incredible discernment just to make good choices when most every other life would be totally confused and in chaos and scattered, lost. That's the evidence. That's the miracle. The power, the real power of the Spirit of God at work within you is that your house is still standing in all of the storms of life. So if you are ready for the kinds of magic that God actually is guaranteeing your life this year, not levitating or unicorn blood or anything, I want to level with you. If you want miracles, those kinds of miracles in your life this year, preparing for the storm is the same thing as preparing for a miracle. Preparing for the storms in your life is preparing for the miracle. Let me say it again in a different way just so you understand. You cannot be more prepared for a miracle in your life than you are for a storm. I know we're not a very verbal church, but I just want to make sure you understand this. Not because I need gratification, but because I really want, for your own sake, because I love you, you need to hear this. You cannot be more prepared for the miraculous power of God in and through your life than you are prepared for the storms of life. You cannot. God is preparing you for a storm so that in that storm you get to experience a miracle. Did anybody hear that? Okay, just making sure. Cool. We can move on. You don't have to get all Pentecostal or whatever and fall into the aisles, and you can if you want. You want? No. You do not in the back. That's fine. I will not make you do that. But you can. You do, but you don't. Okay, that's fine. So, question is, I want to be as practical as I can because sometimes these spaces aren't really clear and practical. I want to try and help as best I can. So, to be a life that is prepared for that storm, what we're wanting to do is deepen and strengthen our spiritual selves as much as possible this year. So, first and foremost, if we're really following what Jesus is telling us, this is really important. First, you have to choose a really strong foundation to begin with. All the strongest buildings in the world on a weak foundation, useless. You have to choose a strong foundation. I've shared this before, but almost a couple years ago, my family and I, we moved into a new space, and it's on a little bit of a hill, which is asking for trouble, in a region where our natural disasters are earthquakes, fires, and mudslides, and we decided to move on a hill. Here we are on this hillside, and one of the reasons that we had confidence moving in is because before we moved in the backyard of this space, we found these huge, like ornamental rocks, these huge boulders. And what we were told is that those boulders, those huge rocks, were sourced from where the foundation of the house was built on. So in other words, our house, and this is different than some of the other homes in the neighborhood, was actually built on river bedrock. The inspector told us that if a huge earthquake hits and some of the other houses fall down, this house will remain standing. So even though it's built right in the middle of the danger zone, because it's built on bedrock, this house will stay standing. I think you can understand why I enlist that metaphor to make my point today. But here's what I don't want us to miss. You might like Jesus a lot, but Jesus said crazy things, like, whoever builds their life on these words of mine will be like that house built on bedrock. Let me translate for us what Jesus is claiming. A human claimed this. He said, I am the best bedrock, the best foundation for anyone's life. I don't care what you're building and what shape it takes and what's on top of it, the best, the strongest, the most secure, trustworthy foundation for anybody's life is me. Not me, Joseph, just to be clear, don't take that out of context. Jesus, I almost said Joseph. Jesus. Jesus said, I'm in therapy, it's okay, I'm working through this. Now listen, most people don't deliberately build a life on a weak foundation. Of course you don't. Nobody chooses that. It's just you're busy. You went to college because that's what you do when you're 18-ish. Or maybe you didn't, you got a job because that's what you got to do and you had to pay the bills, and then you start building a life. How do you build a life? You take cues from the people next to you, like, is this strong enough? Should I build it? How tall should I build? I should build it this way. Okay, what color should I paint okay, that's the color I paint a wall to build a life. I suppose that's what we got to do. Like, this is the shape of it, the size of it, the height of it, the strength of it. This is I suppose, what you got to do to build a life. And so we get busy, maybe not asking some of those big questions because we've been convinced and people have told us, listen, you're too busy and frankly, the questions can't be answered. Are you so sure? Are you so sure that you haven't gotten busy building a life the way that most people around us and most of the pack that you run with is building a life and never stopped long enough to question whether or not you're on a foundation strong enough to sustain during the storms? And what if you could know for sure? What if? People who build on simply what feels strong enough to me remind me of the people in Los Angeles who build houses on those stilts extending out over the cliff's edge. Anybody live in one of those? Okay, good. So I can say this honestly. They're nuts. You've seen these. Maybe you've visited some of them for like 3 minutes. And I get it. It's expensive here. And you're like, all I can afford is like 2 feet of land on this cliff's edge. Like, I'll take it. And then I'm just going to build a house out into the sky. As soon as I showed that picture, I saw 3 people in the room go, yeah, that's a good. Now, I want you to think about a life that's built without anything underneath it. I hope you're just as nervous about that because you're going to build it on some strong things. I have. I mean, there's been seasons of my life I've built it on a strong financial portfolio. I built it on talent, and maybe that got you pretty far. I built it on some key relationships. Man, as long as I got my dad here, as long as I've got this girl, as long as I've got this friend, I can go anywhere. And then the thunder started rumbling, the storm came, and it hit that part of my life. And it hit that part of my life, and it hit that part of my life, and I realized I was just on those 4x4 stilts, and I was really on no foundation to begin with because I had nothing stronger than what was just taken away from me. Are you on a strong foundation? You get to ask yourself that question this year. Something that doesn't just feel strong enough, but something that has proven to be strong enough. Now, after that, maybe you've chosen a foundation. There's one critical choice that Jesus invites us to make here. I'm going to invite you to make it. That separates really strong lives from lives that are still vulnerable. And it's actually one choice that you make repeatedly. When Jesus said, with faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it's going to move. Nothing will be impossible for you. I don't know if you know this, but he was actually pointing at a specific mountain. And it was a mountain within eye shot of everybody. He pointed this mountain. He's like, you remember, like this mountain that moved. See, what they would remember their grandparents telling them about was about 70 years or so before Jesus said this, is that this mountain that you see in the middle of the picture and then the small little hill that you see on the right used to be two mountains of the same size. And then King Herod, who was ruling in the region at the time, thought, I need my fortress to be higher than anybody else's. And so he gives this command. Hey, y'all, can you just lop off the top of one mountain and put it on the top of another mountain? You know, like, pretty simple. Like, take the whipped cream off your piece of pumpkin pie and just put it right on top of my piece of pumpkin pie. Like, to Herod, one command. But guess what? The grandparents of the people listening to Jesus say this, they did it. They did the impossible. And to Herod, the impossible was accomplished with one little sentence. Move the mountain. Because that's what Herod sounds like to me. But to the people who actually experienced it, made it happen, it was done bucket by bucket, trip by trip, choice by choice, with faith as small as a mustard seed, over and over, in time, you will find that you have even moved a mountain. You notice Jesus doesn't say a strong life is one that bought a house on a rock, because that's not true to life. It's a house built, nail by nail, board by board, over time. Not an overnight success in your spiritual life, but an over-life success in your spiritual life. That's what he's calling us into, this methodical, brick-by-brick approach to getting stronger and stronger every day until one day, frankly, when you need it most, you are going to find that you are stronger and farther than you realized. So, this year, move beyond just wanting to be stronger spiritually. Before the storms hit, because they will, probably sometime around July, before those storms hit, don't just want to be strong. Will you do what's necessary to become stronger, deeper spiritually? And throughout this series, I want to try and convert those wants into wills. And so maybe for today, I suggest you saying, I will choose a practice before I need its power. I will choose a practice before I need its power, choosing spiritual habits in comfort that will serve you in crisis. What do you think actually built the lives that you admire most? Built those strong, stable lives that you admire most? I get a chance to do a lot of weddings, which I love, and I'll tell you from my experience that as many weddings as I've done, the two people that stand in front of me getting married feel the same way that the two people that stood in front of me at the wedding last week were feeling. The same way I felt when I was standing at the altar there with my beautiful bride. And the way that you feel when you're at that point in the ceremony is, I cannot imagine living life with anybody else, ever. There's probably not a better person on the planet. Like nowhere. This person is literally perfect. That's why they call it madly in love, because you've lost your mind. The scenario is not well suited for critical thinking. Everybody's there. You're all dolled up. It's expensive. You don't want to disappoint people. You see your fiancé looking better than they have ever looked. And let me level with you, maybe better than they will ever look. And you lose your mind. Better, worse, rich, poor, whatever, take it all. As long as I go away with that, that'd be awesome. And then you regain sanity. Don't nod too emphatically, you're sitting next to your spouse. Some of you. But this is so cool, though. This is the cool part. Because then the discipline of the relationship sets in. And you have a chance to build the life of love that becomes the marriage that you admire. Sometimes in these spaces, we overplay this idea that Christianity is a relationship and not a religion, and it is. The biggest miracle Jesus performed was to reconcile a relationship between you and your Creator. Nothing left to pay, nothing left to be afraid of. That's what Jesus made possible. So that's incredible. That's the biggest miracle. But as that relationship moves on from there, from the wedding day, if you don't incorporate a little religion into it, you may not enjoy the benefits of it. And have you ever noticed that the best relationships in our lives are a little bit religious? Like there's a little bit of habit. Like we're still going to date each other. I'm still going to make sure that I carve out time for you. I'm still going to tell you that I love you. I'm still going to learn what your love language is, and I want you to learn mine so that we can approach each other that way. We're going to work through difficult times together so we can become closer when life is tough. There's a little bit of religion in the best relationships. And what Jesus is inviting us into is a somewhat methodical approach to the miraculous life. There is a little bit of step-by-step, bucket by bucket, mustard seed by mustard seed approach to building the strength that you want in your life. And I want to tell you, because I love you and I want to be really, really direct, and I know you can handle it. For those of you who are Jesus followers today, and I know that's not everybody, but for those who are, I'm concerned for some of you. I'm concerned for some of you who say you're Jesus followers because you do have a great foundation in Christ. God has given you that great foundation, but if you're honest, you have not built much more on that foundation. God is only important to you when he's easy for you. God is only important to you when it's convenient for you. God is only important for you when he doesn't talk too much about your wallet or talk too much about your love life or talk too much about your job. God is only important to you when it's simple for you. And my fear for you is that, yes, you will hit those inevitable storms, and no, you will not be completely destroyed because God has given you a foundation and he is faithful. But my friends, you are carrying little more than an umbrella right now. And God wants more stability, more strength, more hope, more peace, more joy, more love for you in the midst of the storms than you have built so far. I want you to move beyond that initial foundation into a life that builds the strength of relationship that you will most desperately need. And this is what you see in the lives of people who, yes, get knocked around and yes, grieve and experience loss and experience those challenges in life like we all will, but are still standing. It's not because they had an easier time getting there. In fact, in many cases, they've hit something harder than us. It's just they've practiced a lifestyle of choosing a habit and comfort that serves them well in crisis. What I find is that when people hit pain in life, they usually make one of three choices, and I certainly have. They either get better, they get bitter, or they get blitzed. It's true. And what I've discovered, in addition to that, is that when you hit a new pain, maybe the biggest pain of your life, you will typically go back to what you used when it hurt less. And so if the last time you struggled with something, the last time you had pain, the last time you hit a storm, it's something that God used to deepen your faith, tighten your relationships with healthy people, help you get stronger for the next one. That's probably what you'll go back to when you hit this new pain. If in the past all it gave you was anger and resentment and fear, it made you bitter, that might be what you can expect from this new pain. If the last time it hurt, you got blitzed in the grand sense of that, like you escaped it, you ignored it, you just waited for time to heal it, that's probably all you've got to go on when you hit this new pain. Choose in comfort what your life will need in crisis. So let me land us in something that you can do with this if you want to. Be honest with yourself when it comes to your spiritual life, the most important part of who you are, truly. Don't just want to be stronger and deeper spiritually. What are you willing to be building this year? I had to rhyme because I'm a preacher and we try to be cute all the time. What are you willing to be building this year? Now, I know that for some of us it does not feel urgent because life feels great, but there are some of you, and you're here today and you're right in the middle of a storm, or maybe the storm just blew past your life and you wished you would have heard this 6 months ago. You wished you would have heard this a year ago. You wished you would have heard this 5 years ago. The most important question, wherever you're coming from, is this. Just to get us started, what foundation are you building your life on? What are you standing on? What are you placing your ultimate trust in when it's all done? Is it just your own intellect and your strength and your feelings? Those are probably strong. Are those strong enough? You get to decide. Great place to explore that here if you want to. It's not the only place you can explore it, but that's why we create the starting point environment. It's 8 weeks. It's a guided discussion with people in the room, like 10 to 12 people who are asking the same big questions you are, and they're just not so sure that they can't get some answers. So they go in there, it's led by a really qualified leader, but it's not a debate. You don't have to sign the dotted line at the end. You get to come up with a decision for yourself, but great conversation around the biggest questions of life. Highly encourage you to check that out. But for those of us with some relationship with Jesus, or that's what you would describe, I want to get just a little religious with that relationship. really quickly, because I want to be as helpful as I can. If you don't know much about some of the practices that build that strength and that deepening spiritual life, I could not more highly recommend John Ortberg's book, The Life You've Always Wanted. Really great introduction to some of the simple practices of the spiritual life. If you want to go a deeper dive into it and sound really smart when you talk about it, you can go to Adele Calhoun's work. This is great, the Spiritual Disciplines Handbook. It even looks deeper. Look, it's like a drop of water, and you know that's a deep ocean. Okay. And if you need further reinforcement, if anybody that we've ever heard of could get away with not building habits of a spiritual life, it would have been Jesus. But he did it. Showed us how to pray. Showed us how to fast. He got away with Saul. He would get together with his disciples and sing. Did you know that? That's a spiritual practice. I know some of you think that's weird that we do it. Just admit, we are the first generation that thinks that's weird. People have been singing together forever. You don't have to deconstruct everything in your life. It's exhausting and you know it. Jesus would get together with his disciples and sing. You know why? Because those anthems remind us of things, especially when it's easy to forget them. Remind you that there is more power available to you than the pain that you're going through. Reminding you that even if you don't feel seen, you are loved. Reminding that you are not alone when we hear the voices of people who by faith are choosing to sing these songs, even if at times it's through the gritted teeth of doubt. That's a spiritual practice. I want to make it really simple. Even more simple than that, you don't have to buy a book and you're like, oh, I can't really bring myself to sing, Joseph. That's so weird. Maybe I'll try it next week. That's okay. You can try it next week. Do what I do most of the time, which is just read one chapter of Scripture a day. That's simple. How can you do words that you don't hear? So just start there. If you don't know where to start, Matthew's biography of Jesus is great. Read a chapter of it. It takes you a couple minutes. And if Jesus says to do something, give it a shot. Test drive it. I dare you. And in that time, pray. How do you pray? We can talk about that. We'll do series about that and all that. But just be honest. Just be real. God already knows your heart. And his desire to connect with you is so much greater than your desire to pursue him. Just pray. Choose a time in the day that you'll do it. First thing in the morning. I do this last thing at night. I do this on my lunch break. I reallocate some of my screen time to soul time. I just made that up. That sounds really pithy. But honestly, your phone is getting some of the attention your soul needs. I know that the spiritual habits, if you start them today, you start them on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, it's going to feel so incremental, like a bucket of dirt trying to move a mountain. You're going to not even perceive the change. Over time, one day you will find out that the power of the Spirit of God that is at work within you, no matter what storm hits your life, cannot be shaken and cannot be broken. That's God's desire for your life. Let me pray for you. God, thank you for keeping so much a mystery to us in the spiritual life. I would be tempted to think I'm God if I could figure it all out. But I also love, God, that you made access to it simple. You've not hidden yourself from us. I pray, God, that you would humble some of us to return back to simple practices of faith, because you might meet us powerfully in that. We're not above it. We've not moved beyond it. God, you are so desirous to meet us in those spaces and in those times. But God, also give us the courage to go there with a desire to do something with what we hear. And it's going to challenge us. It's going to nudge us at times. I suppose if we're going to live an exceptional life, or in the words of Jesus, an abundant life, it's not going to come without some challenges, some nerves, some sweat every once in a while. Give us the courage to not just hear, but to do. We love you, and we give our lives to you, knowing that you want more for us than we could possibly take for ourselves. Jesus, I pray this in your name. Amen.
Thank you for listening. For more information, follow us on social media at Radius Church LA and visit us on the web at radius.la.